When Andrew uncovers his wife Lisa's affair with a charismatic executive, his world crumbles. Fueled by anger and betrayal, he meticulously plans a calculated revenge to expose her lies and regain control of his life. But as his plan unfolds with devastating precision, the aftermath takes an unexpected, tragic turn, forcing Andrew to confront his own role in their unraveling. In a story of love, trust, and vengeance, Andrew learns that even the most perfect revenge can leave scars deeper than the betrayal itself. This gripping tale explores the fragility of relationships and the haunting cost of justice served cold. It was a crisp autumn evening when I first noticed the small signs that something was off in my marriage. Lisa had always been vibrant and engaged, a powerhouse in her public relations career, but lately, she seemed distant. Her laughter, once infectious, had become muted. Our dinner conversations, which used to flow effortlessly, now felt like forced pleasantries. I chalked it up to stress at work and didn't press. After all, I had my own demanding schedule in tech, managing a team and juggling tight deadlines. Marriage ebbs and flows, I told myself. One evening, while we were getting ready to head out for dinner with friends, Lisa couldn't find her purse. She dumped its contents onto the kitchen counter in a flurry of frustration, and among the lipstick and receipts, a sleek business card caught my eye. David Chambers, it read, with a title boasting some senior position at a well-known corporation. "Who's David?" I asked casually, picking up the card. Lisa glanced over, a bit too quickly, and snatched it out of my hand. "Oh, just a client. He runs one of the accounts I manage." Her tone was light, almost dismissive, but the way she slid the card into her wallet with precision struck me as deliberate. I didn't dwell on it then. Relationships are built on trust, and I had no reason to doubt her. But that trust would soon become my greatest folly. Lisa's behavior grew stranger over the following weeks. She began spending more time at the office, her phone constantly buzzing with notifications she seemed intent on hiding. She'd leave the room to take calls, claiming they were work-related. When I tried to plan a weekend getaway, something we hadn't done in months, she brushed it off. "I'm swamped right now," she said, not meeting my eyes. The pivotal moment came late one Friday night. Lisa was asleep, her phone charging on the nightstand. I was working on my laptop, tying up loose ends from the week, when her screen lit up. I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but the message preview caught my attention. "Last night was incredible. When can I see you again?" It was from someone saved as DC. My heart thudded in my chest. Rationalizing it as a misunderstanding, I stared at the phone for what felt like an eternity, debating whether to pick it up. The light dimmed, and I told myself I was being paranoid. But the seed of doubt had been planted. The next morning, Lisa was unusually chipper. She hummed to herself as she brewed coffee, her cheerfulness feeling out of place given the growing distance between us. "You're in a good mood," I remarked. "Why wouldn't I be?" she replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I nodded, forcing a smile of my own. The day passed uneventfully, but I couldn't shake the lingering unease. That night, while Lisa was in the shower, I unlocked her phone. The messages from DC confirmed my worst fears. They weren't just colleagues or friends. They were lovers. Each text was a dagger to my heart, detailing dinners, trips, and stolen moments I had no idea about. I closed the app, my hands trembling. Confronting her then and there felt premature. I needed more, proof beyond what she could dismiss as harmless flirtation or misinterpretation. Over the next week, I gathered information discreetly. I combed through her emails when she wasn't around, finding confirmations for work trips that aligned suspiciously well with David Chambers' itinerary. Using a colleague's help, I accessed hotel bookings and restaurant reservations made under her name. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of betrayal. Lisa had lied to me repeatedly, using her career as a cover for a secret life I was only beginning to unravel. The night I decided to confront her, I sat alone in our living room, staring at the framed photos on the mantel. Images of us smiling on our wedding day, at her favorite beach, and at family holidays seemed to mock me. When Lisa walked through the door, I was ready. "Hey," she greeted me with a breezy smile, but it faltered when she saw my expression. "Lisa, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "Okay," she replied cautiously, setting her purse down. "Who is David Chambers?" Her face paled, and for a moment, I saw the wheels turning in her mind as she tried to compose a response. "He's a client," like I said, she answered, her tone defensive. "And the messages? The dinners? The trips?" I pressed, holding up my phone with screenshots of the texts and reservations. Lisa froze. Her mouth opened as if to deny everything, but no words came. Finally, she sighed, sinking into the armchair across from me. "I never meant to hurt you," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "It just happened." I stared at her, my chest tightening with a mix of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. "How long?" 6 months, she admitted, tears welling in her eyes. The rest of the night was a blur of accusations, excuses, and raw emotion. Lisa claimed she felt neglected, that I'd been too consumed with work, that our spark had faded. It was the same script I'd read about in stories of infidelity, a justification that placed the blame everywhere but on herself. I slept in the guest room that night, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. There was no going back. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a choice, a series of choices that had shattered the life we'd built together. I knew what I had to do. Revenge wasn't just a fleeting thought, it was a promise. The days following the confrontation were a haze of calculated detachment. Lisa tried to act as though things could be repaired, oscillating between apologetic tears and defensive outbursts. I let her think I was undecided. It was easier that way, less suspicion, more time for me to lay the groundwork for what came next. The first thing I did was contact my lawyer. James Darnell was a friend of a friend, known for his sharp tactics and a reputation for winning even the messiest divorce cases. When I explained the situation, his tone turned serious. "Infidelity cases are tricky, Andrew," James said over the phone. "But with the evidence you've got, we're in a strong position. If you want this to work in your favor, you need to stay calm, gather more proof, and let me handle the legal side." His advice became my mantra. Stay calm. Gather proof. Let him handle it. The house was eerily quiet most evenings. Lisa, sensing my emotional withdrawal, kept her distance but still attempted half-hearted gestures to fix things. She cooked dinner twice in 1 week, something she hadn't done in months. Each time, she'd sit across from me at the table, trying to catch my eye. "We can work through this, Andrew," she said one evening, pushing her plate aside. "It doesn't have to end like this." I looked up, forcing a neutral expression. "I'm not sure yet." The ambiguity seemed to placate her. She nodded, but I could see the tension in her posture. She was holding on to the idea that I'd forgive her, that this was just a bump in the road. Unbeknownst to her, I had already started planning my exit. Using a private investigator James recommended, I deepened my understanding of Lisa's affair with David Chambers. The PI was thorough, providing hotel receipts, photographs, and even surveillance footage of them at a luxury resort during one of Lisa's so-called work trips. Each revelation was a blow to my already fragile composure, but I kept my anger contained. I had learned that rage was a fleeting indulgence, while strategy was enduring. Every piece of evidence would serve as a tool in what was shaping up to be a meticulously crafted endgame. One Friday afternoon, Lisa left for another meeting. I didn't confront her or even acknowledge her departure. Instead, I waited until she was gone and called James. "I've got everything I need," I told him. "Let's move forward." "Good," James replied. "Next step is securing your assets." Start shifting funds into an account under your name only. Quietly. I followed his instructions over the next 2 weeks, transferring money from our joint account into a private one. It wasn't about depriving Lisa of anything, this was about protecting what I had worked so hard to build. I didn't want her betrayal rewarded. Then came David. It was one thing to know the man's name, to see his face in photographs, but it was another to meet him. The opportunity presented itself during a corporate event Lisa had encouraged me to attend, likely to keep up appearances. She didn't know I knew he would be there. I had seen his name on the guest list. The event was a high-end affair at a downtown hotel, filled with executives and their spouses mingling over champagne. Lisa flitted between groups, her social butterfly persona on full display. I stayed back, observing. And then I saw him. David Chambers was everything Lisa had described when she first mentioned him months ago, polished, confident, and exuding the kind of charm that seemed effortless. He laughed easily, surrounded by a small crowd hanging on his every word. I waited until he was alone by the bar before approaching. My hands felt steady, my mind sharp. "David Chambers," I said, extending a hand. He turned, his smile faltering slightly as he took my hand. "Yes, and you are?" "Andrew," I replied, my voice calm. "Lisa's husband." The flicker of recognition in his eyes was satisfying. For a moment, he looked like a man caught red-handed, but he quickly masked it with feigned politeness. "Ah, Andrew. Lisa's mentioned you," he said, his tone measured. "I'm sure she has." I let my hand linger in his grasp just long enough to make him uncomfortable before pulling away. "I've heard a lot about you too." David's expression didn't waver, but there was a slight tightening around his jaw. "It's good to finally meet you." The rest of the conversation was brief but heavy with subtext. I could see the unease in his posture, the way his eyes darted around the room as if searching for an escape. It was clear he wasn't used to being confronted, especially not in a setting like this. When I walked away, I felt a sense of control I hadn't experienced in weeks. The pieces were falling into place. The final stage of my plan required one last act of deception. Lisa had been talking for weeks about an upcoming corporate retreat, an exclusive weekend getaway organized by her firm. It was the kind of event that usually included partners, but Lisa had assured me it was employees only. She didn't want me there. What she didn't know was that I had been invited separately. A friend in the industry had pulled some strings, landing me a spot as a guest speaker. I didn't tell Lisa. Instead, I played along, feigning disinterest when she mentioned her trip. "I'll be back Sunday evening," she said the morning she left, leaning in for a kiss I didn't return. "Try to relax this weekend." "Oh, I will," I said, keeping my tone light. As soon as she was out the door, I packed my bag and made my way to the airport. The retreat was being held at a luxurious coastal resort, a picturesque setting for what I intended to be the most memorable weekend of her life. For me, it wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my power, and my life. The resort was as breathtaking as the brochures promised: pristine white sands, a sparkling blue ocean, and luxury villas tucked among palm trees. The air was warm, carrying the faint scent of saltwater and tropical flowers. It should have felt like a getaway, but for me, it was a battlefield. I arrived earlier than Lisa's group, giving me time to settle in and plan my approach. My room was perfectly situated with a balcony that overlooked the central courtyard, offering a clear view of the social hub where guests mingled. I unpacked quickly, my thoughts racing through the possibilities of what might unfold. Lisa wouldn't suspect a thing. She thought she was coming here to bask in the glow of her affair, shielded by the camaraderie of her coworkers. She had no idea I'd be watching her every move, waiting for the perfect moment to expose the truth. The evening cocktail hour brought the guests together, and I spotted Lisa almost immediately. She looked radiant in a flowing emerald dress, her laughter carrying across the courtyard as she held court with a small group, David included. Their proximity was telling, his hand resting lightly on her lower back, her face tilted toward his as if no one else existed. I stayed back, blending into the crowd. It wasn't time yet. The keynote address was scheduled for the next morning, and I knew it would be my moment. As I watched Lisa and David interact, I felt a strange detachment. The anger that had consumed me for weeks was replaced by a cold determination. This wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about execution. That night, I rehearsed my speech in the quiet of my room. It wasn't a typical keynote, no slides, no graphs, no corporate jargon. Instead, it was a story about trust, about the foundations of relationships both personal and professional. Every word was chosen with care, each line a veiled reference to the betrayal that had brought me here. As I practiced, I could almost see Lisa's face when she realized what was happening. I wondered if she would be shocked, angry, or simply resigned. And David, what would he do? Would he deny everything, or would he crumble under the weight of exposure? The next morning, the ballroom was packed. Rows of chairs faced the stage, and the energy in the room was palpable as attendees sipped coffee and chatted. I waited backstage, my nerves steady despite the enormity of what I was about to do. When my name was announced, I walked onto the stage with a calm confidence that belied the storm inside me. The applause was polite but muted, the audience not yet familiar with who I was or what I had to say. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady. "Today, I want to talk about trust. Not just in business, but in life." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. My eyes scanned the room, and there she was, Lisa, sitting beside David, her face lighting up with recognition. She hadn't expected to see me, and the confusion on her face was deliciously satisfying. "Trust is the foundation of every relationship," I continued. "It's what allows us to collaborate, to share our dreams, and to build something meaningful. But trust is fragile. It can be broken in an instant, leaving behind shards that are difficult, if not impossible, to piece back together." Lisa shifted in her seat, her eyes narrowing as she began to grasp the subtext. David, meanwhile, looked straight ahead, his expression unreadable. "As professionals, we understand the importance of accountability," I said, my gaze locking onto Lisa. "When we betray the trust of those who rely on us, the consequences ripple far beyond our intentions. It's not just about the act, it's about the lies, the deception, and the erosion of something sacred." By now, a ripple of unease had spread through the room. People weren't sure if this was part of the speech or something more personal. I could see their curious glances darting between Lisa, David, and me. I wrapped up the speech with a final, pointed statement. "Trust is hard to earn and easy to lose. When it's gone, what's left is not just broken relationships, but broken people. Let us remember that in all that we do." The applause was polite but confused, and I left the stage without a backward glance. The damage was done. Lisa found me later, cornering me near the pool. Her face was a mixture of anger and panic. "What the hell was that?" she hissed, keeping her voice low enough to avoid drawing attention. "An honest reflection," I replied calmly. "Did it hit too close to home?" "Andrew, this isn't the place." "It's exactly the place," I cut her off. "You've been lying to me for months. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Her eyes darted around, ensuring no one was within earshot. "We can talk about this later. Please don't make a scene." "I already made my point," I said, stepping closer. "And I think everyone here got the message." Lisa's composure cracked. Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment, I saw the vulnerability she had worked so hard to hide. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered. "But it did," I said, my tone devoid of sympathy. "And now you'll have to live with the consequences." David approached me later that evening, his demeanor subdued. "Andrew," he said, extending a hand. "Can we talk?" I didn't take his hand. "About what?" Look, I know what you're doing, and I get it. But this is between you and Lisa. Let's leave my involvement out of it. I laughed, the sound sharp and cold. You think you can just walk away from this? You're as guilty as she is, David. He stiffened, his charm faltering. This doesn't have to get any uglier than it already is. Uglier? I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You've already destroyed one marriage. Pray I don't destroy more than that. David paled but said nothing. He turned and walked away, leaving me with a deep sense of satisfaction. That night, I packed my bags and checked out of the resort early. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to do. The stage had been set, the players exposed, and the fallout was inevitable. As the car took me to the airport, I looked out at the ocean, its vastness a stark contrast to the turmoil I had left behind. This wasn't the end, there was still the divorce, the division of assets, and the rebuilding of my life. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of closure. Lisa had made her choices. Now, it was time for me to make mine. After the retreat, I filed for divorce. The process was swift, efficient, and cold, everything Lisa's betrayal had necessitated. The evidence I'd gathered left no room for argument, and our lawyer sessions were brief, punctuated by her quiet sniffles and my stony silence. Within months, the papers were signed, and Lisa moved out of the house we had built together. She stayed with friends for a while, eventually finding a small apartment downtown. David Chambers, predictably, vanished from her life. Rumors circulated that his wife had left him, taking their children. His career took a hit, too, corporate scandals don't sit well in his industry. But I didn't care about him anymore. My focus was on reclaiming what was left of my life. At first, I thought I was doing well. The clean break felt like a relief. I threw myself into work, spending long hours at the office and taking on challenging projects. My colleagues praised my dedication, but behind closed doors, I felt hollow. The life I'd built was gone, and while I had meticulously dismantled the parts that had betrayed me, I couldn't escape the echo of Lisa's laughter or the ghost of our shared dreams. One evening, I found myself sitting alone in the house, a drink in hand, staring at the framed photographs I hadn't yet taken down. There we were on our wedding day, her face glowing with joy as I whispered something in her ear. There we were in Italy, posing in front of the Colosseum. And there, on the mantel, was a picture of the two of us laughing during a snowy weekend in Vermont. I had erased Lisa from my present, but the past refused to let go. Weeks turned into months, and the loneliness became unbearable. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Monroe, who helped me unpack the anger and grief I had buried. You need to allow yourself to feel, Andrew, she said during one session. You've built walls around your emotions, but those walls are also keeping out healing. I nodded but didn't fully understand what she meant until one rainy Sunday evening when I found an old box of Lisa's things in the back of the closet. I had forgotten it was there, photos, trinkets, and a small journal she used to keep. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. The journal wasn't about David or the affair. It was about us, entries filled with her love for me, her fears about the growing distance between us, and her longing for the connection we'd once shared. The words were a gut punch, each page a testament to the cracks I hadn't noticed or had chosen to ignore. I closed the journal, my chest tight with regret. Had I failed her as much as she had failed me? The thought lingered, gnawing at the edges of my resolve. A week later, I received a call from Lisa's closest friend, Mia. Her voice was shaky, panicked. Andrew, she said. It's Lisa. She's in the hospital. The words didn't register at first. What happened? I asked, my voice flat, detached. She overdosed. I don't know if it was intentional or an accident, but she's in critical condition. You need to come. I hung up and sat in stunned silence before grabbing my keys. The drive to the hospital was a blur of headlights and rain-slicked streets. Memories of Lisa flooded my mind, moments both bitter and sweet. By the time I reached the hospital, my hands were shaking. Mia met me in the waiting room, her face pale and tear-streaked. "She's alive," she said, her voice trembling. "But it's bad, Andrew. They don't know if she'll wake up." I nodded, unable to speak. A nurse directed me to Lisa's room, and as I stepped inside, the sight of her nearly brought me to my knees. She looked so small, so fragile, hooked up to machines that beeped softly in the sterile silence. Her face was pale, her lips chapped, and her hair matted against the pillow. I sat beside her, my hands gripping the edge of the chair. "Lisa," I whispered, though I wasn't sure she could hear me. "Why?" The only response was the rhythmic hum of the ventilator. I stayed there for hours, watching her, waiting for a flicker of movement, a sign of life. None came. The doctors told me later that night that her chances were slim. The damage to her body was extensive, and even if she survived, she might never regain full brain function. Mia broke down beside me, sobbing into her hands. I stayed until the early hours of the morning before heading home, my mind a fog of guilt and sorrow. Had I driven her to this? Was my revenge the final nail in the coffin of her fragile psyche? The questions spiraled endlessly, each one sharper than the last. Lisa passed away 3 days later. I was there, holding her hand as the machines went silent. The hospital staff offered their condolences, but their words felt hollow, meaningless. At the funeral, I stood apart from the small crowd that had gathered, my mind replaying every argument, every moment I had ignored her pain. I had wanted justice for her betrayal, but now all I felt was regret. Months later, I sold the house and moved to a smaller apartment in the city. The walls were bare, the space minimalist, a reflection of the emptiness I felt inside. Lisa was gone, and with her, any chance of closure. I tried to find meaning in her death, but it eluded me. Was it a punishment for my coldness? A tragic consequence of her own guilt? Or just a cruel twist of fate? I didn't know, and I wasn't sure I ever would. In the quiet of my new home, I often thought of Lisa's journal, her words a haunting reminder of what we had lost long before her affair. Love, trust, betrayal, revenge, they had all woven together into a tapestry of ruin. And now, all that remained was silence.